The sun had barely risen over the quiet little town of Willow Creek. Golden light streamed through the lace curtains, painting soft patterns on the wooden floor. In the small white house at the end of Maple Street, Margaret Lewis sat in her rocking chair, a knitted shawl around her shoulders and a cup of tea warming her hands. She was 72 now. Her hands bore the lines of time, but her eyes still carried a calm strength. The house was quiet, too quiet. Only the clock ticked on the wall, a gentle reminder that another day had begun. She had not expected visitors. Mother's Day, after all, had long stopped being a day of celebration for her. Her daughter, Emily, lived 2 states away, always busy with her own life, her own world. Sometimes months passed between phone calls. Margaret never complained. She had learned that silence was part of motherhood, too. But that morning, just as she reached for the newspaper, she heard a sound she hadn't heard in months, the creak of the front gate. Her heart skipped. She turned toward the window, and there she was, Emily, standing on the porch, holding a small white envelope in her hand. For a moment, Margaret froze. The sight felt almost unreal. The last time they had spoken had ended in tears. Margaret had said things she regretted, and Emily had walked away before Margaret could apologize. Now, here she was, older, calmer, dressed in a light blue coat. Her hair was tied up neatly, and yet there was something fragile in her smile. Margaret opened the door slowly, her voice trembling. "Emily, you came." Emily nodded, her eyes glistening. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom." Margaret tried to speak, but her throat tightened. Emily stepped forward and handed her the envelope. "I know I don't come often, but I wanted you to have this." Margaret held it carefully like something sacred. A simple card, white, with a pressed flower on the cover. No fancy wrapping, no ribbon, just pure simplicity. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. But when she looked up again, Emily had already stepped back. "I can't stay long," Emily said softly, "but please, read it." Margaret wanted to ask 100 questions. Why now? Why not stay for tea? But before she could, Emily smiled one last time, turned, and walked back toward her car. Margaret stood in the doorway, the cool morning air brushing against her face, the card trembling in her hand. As the car disappeared down the road, she whispered to herself, what could be inside this card after all these years? She returned to her rocking chair, her fingers tracing the edges of the envelope. There was something different about it, a little heavier than a normal card. Maybe a note. Maybe something more. Taking a deep breath, she began to open it. The paper tore softly as Margaret opened the envelope, careful not to damage the delicate flower pressed on the cover. Inside was a simple Mother's Day card, pastel pink with tiny daisies printed along the edges. The front read, "To the woman who taught me love, even when I didn't understand it." Her hands trembled. For years, Emily had sent store-bought cards, short, polite, predictable. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom. Miss you." But this one felt different. The handwriting inside wasn't printed. It was Emily's. She unfolded the card slowly, and something fell out. A folded letter, handwritten on plain paper, the edges slightly smudged, as if touched many times. Margaret picked it up, her heart already beating faster. She began to read, "Dear Mom, I don't know how to start this because saying Happy Mother's Day feels too small. For a long time, I didn't really understand you. Why you worked so much, why you missed my recitals, why you always seemed so tired. When I was little, I thought love meant being there. And you were never there, at least not in the way I wanted. I used to watch other moms bake cookies or sit in the audience at school plays, and I would think, why can't my mom be like that? But now that I'm grown, I understand. Love wasn't in the cookies or the plays. It was in the meals you cooked after 12-hour shifts. It was in the coats you mended instead of buying new ones. It was in the nights you stayed up counting bills while pretending everything was fine. I used to think you chose work over me. Now I see. You worked for me. I see everything, Mom, and I'm sorry it took me this long. Margaret paused, her eyes welling up. The room seemed to blur around her. Her old heart, so used to loneliness, began to ache, not from pain, but from recognition. She could see it all so clearly. Emily, at 5 years old, standing by the window, waiting for her. The tiny lunchbox on the kitchen table. The nights Margaret returned home too late to kiss her goodnight. Her fingers pressed against the page. "Oh, Emily," she whispered, tears slipping down her wrinkled cheeks. She continued reading. "There's one memory I can't forget. The night before my high school graduation. You came home late, covered in dust, your hands shaking from exhaustion. I was angry that you missed rehearsal. I yelled at you, said you didn't care. You just looked at me and said, 'One day you'll understand.' I hated those words then, but I understand them now. Because, Mom, I've become you. I work late. I skip dinners. I pretend I'm fine when I'm not. And sometimes I catch myself wishing I could call you. Not as a daughter complaining, but as a woman who finally understands how heavy your heart must have been." Margaret pressed the card to her chest and closed her eyes. For a moment she could almost feel Emily's voice echoing in the room. She whispered to the empty air, "I never wanted you to become me, Emily. I just wanted you to have better." The clock ticked softly in the background. The scent of tea had faded. Outside, the sunlight had shifted, painting long shadows across the floor. The kind that come when morning begins to fade into afternoon. Margaret turned the page of the letter, her heart heavy, yet strangely full. There was more. "Mom, I know we lost years between us, years filled with silence, pride, and misunderstanding. But I don't want to lose more. I'm writing this because I'm finally strong enough to say thank you. Thank you for every no. You said that saved me. Thank you for every sacrifice you made that I never saw. And thank you for never giving up on me, even when I gave up on you." The ink had smudged slightly near the bottom, maybe a teardrop from Emily while writing. Margaret's lips quivered as she touched the mark. A soft sob escaped her throat. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was release, the kind that comes after years of holding your breath. She placed the letter back in her lap, wiping her cheeks. The card had spoken louder than words ever could. It wasn't just paper, it was forgiveness. It was love returned after years of silence. Margaret looked out the window toward the road where Emily's car had disappeared. And for the first time in a long time, she whispered, "Maybe this isn't the end. Maybe it's the beginning." The letter rested on Margaret's lap, her eyes still glistening with tears. Outside, the afternoon breeze moved softly through the curtains, carrying with it the faint scent of lilacs from the garden. For a long time she didn't move. She just sat there, still, remembering. Every word in that letter had opened a door to the past, and once opened, those doors refused to close. The sound of laughter filled her mind first. A little girl with messy brown curls running barefoot across the living room floor. "Catch me, Mommy," she'd squeal. Margaret smiled at the memory. That was Emily at 4. She remembered that evening clearly. She had come home late again, still wearing her factory uniform, the smell of grease and metal clinging to her clothes. Her back ached, her fingers were raw, but the moment Emily ran into her arms, the exhaustion melted away. They had eaten soup and bread that night. Emily had fallen asleep in her lap, while Margaret hummed an old song her own mother used to sing. For a while everything had been simple, until life grew heavier. The memory shifted. Now she saw herself standing in a dim kitchen, a pile of unpaid bills spread out across the counter. Emily, now a teenager, sat at the table, angry and silent. "Mom, you missed my game again," Emily had said, her voice trembling. Margaret had looked up from the papers, her heart twisting. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, I had to work late." "It's always work, Mom. Do you even know what position I play?" Margaret had tried to smile, but her eyes betrayed the pain she felt. "You're my star player," she said softly. But Emily had rolled her eyes, grabbed her backpack and slammed the door on her way out. That sound, the slamming door, echoed through Margaret's mind even now, all these years later. She could see it all. The long nights at the sewing factory, the smell of oil and sweat, the ticking clock counting down the hours till dawn. She would think of Emily constantly, wondering if her daughter knew she was doing all this for her, not instead of her. Sometimes she'd come home to find Emily already asleep, her homework neatly done, a plate of cold dinner on the table. Margaret would sit there quietly, eating in silence, the house heavy with unspoken words. There were moments when she wanted to wake her up, hold her close, whisper, "I love you." But she never did. She thought there would always be time. A tear slipped down her cheek as the memories kept coming. Emily's first heartbreak, the argument before college, the day Emily left, shouting that she needed to get out and live her own life. Margaret remembered standing by the window that day, her hands trembling as she watched her daughter drive away. The house had never felt emptier. She had stood there for hours, waiting for the car to return. It never did. Margaret reached for the letter again, as if holding it could ease the ache in her chest. She reread the last line Emily had written. "I understand now." The words wrapped around her heart like a gentle embrace. If only Emily knew how often Margaret had prayed for her understanding. Not forgiveness, just understanding. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the fading daylight. "I wish you could have seen it, Emily," she whispered softly. "The nights I came home so tired I couldn't even stand. The way I used to count pennies to make sure you had new shoes for school." Her voice cracked. "But I'd do it all again, every bit of it." Suddenly, she remembered something else. A small wooden box she had kept tucked away for years at the bottom of an old dresser. Inside were the little things she'd saved. Emily's first drawing, a photo of them at the park, a tiny handmade Mother's Day card that said, "I love you bigger than the sky." Margaret rose slowly, her knees stiff, but her resolve strong. She went to the bedroom, opened the dresser drawer, and pulled out the box. Dust covered the lid, but when she opened it, the memories felt alive again. There was the drawing, a crooked stick figure of a woman holding a child's hand. Underneath it, in Emily's messy handwriting, were the words, "Me and Mommy forever." Margaret smiled through tears. "Oh, my baby," she whispered. She pressed the paper against her heart, feeling the old ache transform into something softer, something like peace. She sat back down and looked again at the letter, the ink, the handwriting, the emotion behind every word. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she'd failed as a mother. Maybe she had made mistakes. Maybe she had been absent more than present. But love, her love, had always been there, quietly, faithfully, even when words failed. She whispered to herself, as if Emily could somehow hear her, "I never stopped loving you, not for a single day." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees. The old house creaked, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like Emily's voice still lingered in its walls. Margaret placed the card on the table beside her chair, and for a long while, she simply watched it. That single piece of paper, that letter, had given her something she thought she'd lost forever: connection. And though she didn't know it yet, that letter would soon reveal something even more. Something that would change her heart again before the day ended. The sky outside had begun to dim, turning from pale gold to a deep, bruised orange. The house, once filled with quiet warmth, now felt heavy with unspoken truths. Margaret sat near the window, the letter still resting in her lap. She had read it 3 times already, but each time her heart broke in a new way. The words, "I understand now," lingered in her mind, echoing through every memory she wished she could rewrite. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "Understanding doesn't erase the past, does it?" Her eyes drifted toward the old photograph on the shelf, a younger version of herself, standing beside her husband, David, holding little Emily in her arms. Back then, she'd believed life would always be kind. But fate, she knew now, had other plans. It all started the year Emily turned 8. David's accident had changed everything. One rainy afternoon, he'd gone to work at the construction site and never come back. The call came late. A supervisor's trembling voice, an ambulance siren in the distance. Margaret had rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. One moment she was a wife, the next she was a widow with a child and a mountain of bills. From that day on, her life became a fight. One long, relentless battle against hunger, debt, and despair. She worked anywhere that would take her, cleaning houses, sewing clothes, even mopping floors at night. And through it all, she tried to keep her head high, because she believed dignity was the only thing poverty couldn't steal. But what it did steal, slowly, painfully, was time with Emily. She remembered the nights she came home past midnight, quietly opening Emily's door just to see her sleeping face. Sometimes Emily would stir and mumble, "Mom?" and Margaret would freeze, afraid to wake her, afraid she'd see the disappointment in her daughter's eyes. So she'd whisper softly, "Go back to sleep, baby. Mommy's here." And in the darkness she'd smile, a smile no one ever saw. Margaret sighed, running her fingers over the edge of the letter again. How many years had she carried the weight of that guilt? The guilt of missing moments, birthdays, recitals, late-night talks. She used to think love meant providing. But as the years passed, she began to fear it wasn't enough. She remembered the first Mother's Day after David's death. Emily had made a card with crayons, pink hearts and wobbly letters that said, "To the best mommy in the world, you're my hero." Margaret had cried quietly that night, clutching the card to her chest. She kept it in the wooden box, the same one she'd opened earlier. But over the years, the cards stopped coming, and every time one didn't arrive, the silence felt louder. A tear rolled down her cheek as she whispered, "I tried my best, Emily, but maybe my best wasn't enough." The clock ticked softly, steady, merciless. The room was dim now, shadows climbing the walls. Margaret rose and walked to the kitchen, her hand brushing along the table where she and Emily once sat doing homework together. She could still picture her daughter there, tongue between her teeth, eyes narrowed in concentration, asking, "Mom, what's 8 times 7? And Margaret, half asleep from exhaustion, would smile and answer, 56, my little genius." She chuckled faintly at the memory. Even in hardship, there had been joy, small, fragile moments that made life worth living. But guilt was a cruel thing. It didn't care about the moments you got right. It only reminded you of the ones you missed. As she sat back down, she noticed something strange. At the bottom of Emily's letter, there was a faint line she hadn't noticed before. A crease, as if another note had been tucked underneath. Her fingers trembled as she carefully unfolded the paper once more. And there it was, written in smaller handwriting, almost hidden between the folds. "Mom, you once told me that a mother's love is measured not by her presence, but by her strength. I used to think that was just something you said to make yourself feel better. Now I know, you were right. I wish I could hug you right now and tell you that I'm proud. Not just because you raised me, but because you survived." Margaret's breath caught. Her lips quivered as she read the words again and again until they blurred. Her guilt, the burden she had carried like a stone for decades, began to soften. For so long, she had blamed herself for not being enough. But maybe she had been more than enough. Maybe love had just looked different in their world, rougher, quieter, but still true. Margaret closed her eyes, her hands pressed together as if in prayer. "Thank you, Emily," she whispered. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that." Outside, the evening sky deepened into twilight. The first star appeared above the horizon, faint but steady. She took it as a sign, a reminder that even after darkness, there's light waiting to be seen. But as she looked at the envelope again, she noticed one more thing, something she had completely missed. On the back of the card, in small, neat writing, were 4 words that made her heart stop. "There's more to read." Her eyes widened. "What does that mean?" she murmured. She turned the envelope upside down and gently shook it. A second folded page slipped out, one she hadn't seen before. Her fingers hesitated. A chill ran through her, half fear, half anticipation. Whatever was written on that hidden page, she knew it would change everything again. She took a deep breath and unfolded it. For a long moment, Margaret just stared at the second folded page in her trembling hands. The paper was thin, slightly creased, as if Emily had written it in haste, or maybe with hesitation. Her heart thudded softly in her chest. What could she have hidden? She whispered, afraid of the answer. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the old refrigerator and the distant chirping of crickets outside. Margaret unfolded the page, smoothing the edges gently with her wrinkled fingers. Her eyes began to read. Mom, if you're reading this part, it means you opened the card carefully, like you always do everything. You've always treated things, and people, as if they were fragile. Maybe that's what I got from you. There's something I need to tell you, and I didn't want to say it face to face. Not because I don't love you, but because if I looked into your eyes, I might not be able to say the words. Margaret's chest tightened. A cold wave washed through her. Her fingers clutched the paper a little harder, afraid of what might come next. Mom, I'm leaving for France next month. A long-term posting from work. Maybe for good. I've been offered a position I've dreamed about for years, teaching at a small art institute near Paris. It's everything I ever wanted. But before I go, I needed to make peace with you. I couldn't start a new life carrying the weight of old misunderstandings. Margaret's breath caught. France. The word lingered in her mind like a faraway bell. She imagined Emily walking the cobblestone streets of Paris, far from home, far from her. For a moment, the thought filled her with pride. Her daughter, strong, successful, brave. But almost instantly, that pride turned to pain. She whispered, "So that's why you came today." She looked down again and continued reading. I don't want you to think of this as goodbye. It's not. It's just me finally stepping into the world you sacrificed so much to build for me. All those nights you worked late, they made this possible. Every tear, every tired smile, every meal you skipped. It built the life I have now. You always said, one day you'll understand. Well, that day has come. I understand everything, Mom. And though I can't be near you all the time, I'll carry you with me in every sunrise, every classroom, every painting I see. Margaret pressed a hand to her mouth, trying not to sob aloud. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She could almost hear Emily's voice, trembling yet steady, echoing through the room. I couldn't start a new life carrying the weight of old misunderstandings. It hurt, deeply, but it was the kind of pain that came with healing. Margaret rose slowly from her chair and walked to the window. Outside, the sky was dark now, with stars blinking faintly across the horizon. The streetlights glowed softly, casting warm halos on the empty road. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. Older, yes, but not broken. Somewhere inside that reflection, she could still see the younger woman who had fought through everything. The woman Emily had finally come to understand. She smiled faintly through her tears. "So you're leaving, my darling," she whispered. "I suppose that's what I raised you for. To go farther than I ever could." Her gaze fell on the bottom of the letter again. There was one last paragraph. Smaller, almost hesitant, written in the slanted style Emily used when she was emotional. "Mom, I'm leaving a small box on your porch. You'll find it when you open the door again. It's filled with memories, some old, some new. And one of them is the reason I'll never forget you, no matter where I go." Margaret blinked in confusion. A box on the porch? She hadn't noticed anything earlier when Emily left. Her heart began to race as she stood up quickly, the letter still in her hand. She walked to the front door, her cane tapping softly against the wooden floor. The cool night air rushed in as she stepped outside. And there it was, right beside the old welcome mat, a small wooden box tied with a pale blue ribbon. Margaret froze for a moment, staring at it in disbelief. The porch light flickered softly above her, illuminating the box as if inviting her to open it. With trembling hands, she bent down and picked it up. It was surprisingly light, but she could hear the faint rustle of paper and metal inside. She carried it back to the table, sat down, and slowly untied the ribbon. Inside, beneath a folded handkerchief, lay a collection of memories, a small photograph, an old pendant, a child's drawing, and a note resting on top. Margaret's heart began to pound again as she unfolded the note. "These are pieces of us. I've kept them all these years. The photo of you holding me on my first day of school, the pendant you gave me when Dad died, The drawing I made that said, "Me and Mommy forever." I'm returning them now, not to give them away, but to remind you, you never lost me. You never will. Margaret gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. Her tears came freely now, not from sorrow, but from overwhelming love. The box wasn't a goodbye gift. It was a bridge, a quiet promise that no matter where Emily went, their bond would endure. She picked up the small drawing, faded, fragile, but still intact, and pressed it to her heart. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of rain and spring flowers. Margaret closed her eyes and let the moment wash over her. Her daughter was leaving, yes, but this time she wasn't losing her. The night passed slowly. Margaret couldn't sleep. She sat by the window long after midnight, the box open beside her, its contents spread across the table like pieces of her life. The pendant shimmered faintly in the moonlight. The old photograph, faded around the edges, showed her younger self holding a tiny Emily in her arms, both smiling, both unaware of the storms life would one day bring. Every time she looked at that picture, her chest ached with equal parts joy and sorrow. The letter, folded neatly beside the box, felt almost alive, as though Emily's voice still whispered between its lines. By dawn, Margaret's eyes were tired but peaceful. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't felt since David died, stillness inside her heart. The sky began to lighten, the pale gold of morning painting over the shadows. She poured herself a cup of tea and stepped out onto the porch. The wooden floor creaked beneath her feet, the way it always did. The air was cool and birds had just begun to sing. She looked out toward the road, the same road Emily had driven down yesterday, and smiled softly. "France," she whispered. The word didn't hurt anymore. It sounded like freedom. Just as she turned to go back inside, something caught her eye. At the far end of the porch, near the old flower pot, lay another small envelope. Margaret frowned, surprised. It hadn't been there last night. Her heart quickened as she bent down to pick it up. The handwriting was instantly familiar, Emily's again. Across the front, it read, "For when you wake up." Margaret's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a short note, only a few lines, but enough to bring tears flooding back to her eyes. "Mom, I came back early this morning. You were asleep by the window. I didn't wake you. You looked peaceful for the first time in years. I left this note just to say I saw you smile. I wanted to remember that. I've taken your pendant with me for the journey. You said once it brings luck. Maybe it'll bring me strength too. Don't worry about me, okay? I'm carrying home with me. Always. Love. Emily." Margaret pressed the note to her lips, her heart both breaking and healing at once. Emily had come back, even if just for a moment, quietly, tenderly, the way love always returns when you least expect it. She pictured her daughter standing there, watching her sleep, leaving that note with the same gentleness she'd once used to place daisies in her mother's hair as a child. The thought made her smile through her tears. The sun rose higher, washing the world in soft light. Margaret looked around her porch, the flowers, the empty chair, the small wooden box. And suddenly, nothing felt empty anymore. The house wasn't silent now. It breathed with memories. She sat down slowly, unfolded Emily's letter again, and began reading it aloud. Her voice shaky but full of warmth. Each word felt like a prayer, each tear a blessing. She paused halfway through and looked toward the horizon. For a moment she could almost see Emily, not as a grown woman, but as the little girl who used to run barefoot in the grass, her laughter echoing across the yard. The image felt so real that Margaret whispered, "Emily, my love, are you here?" And in that moment, the morning breeze stirred, soft and cool, brushing against her cheek like the touch of a hand. She smiled. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe something more. The kettle whistled softly inside, but she didn't move. Instead, she looked down at the box again, the memories, the drawings, the old photo, and whispered, "I used to think I failed as a mother, but you've shown me I succeeded in the one thing that mattered most, loving you." Her voice cracked, but it was filled with peace. A few hours later, the mailman stopped by. He found her still sitting on the porch, her hands resting on the box, a faint smile on her face. He called out, "Morning, Mrs. Lewis." Margaret turned her head and waved. her voice soft but steady. "Good morning, Jack. It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" Jack nodded. "It surely is, ma'am." As he walked away, Margaret looked down the road again, whispering to herself, "Yes, a beautiful day to begin again." That afternoon, she went inside and pulled out a fresh piece of paper. Her hand shook as she picked up the pen, but her eyes gleamed with quiet purpose. At the top, she wrote, "My dear Emily, a letter back to you." And beneath that, the first words came easily. "You were right, my darling. A mother's love never ends. It just waits to be read." She smiled, wiped a tear, and began to write. The afternoon sun poured through the window, turning everything golden. The wooden table, the box of memories, even the lines on Margaret's hands. The house was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that felt lonely anymore. This quiet was soft, like a pause after a long song, a silence filled with peace. On the table lay a fresh sheet of paper. The first few words were already written. "My dear Emily, a letter back to you." Margaret adjusted her glasses and smiled faintly. It had been years since she'd written a real letter. Her fingers ached a little, but her heart felt lighter than it had in decades. She began to write slowly, her pen moving across the page in looping strokes. "My sweet Emily, when I opened your card yesterday, I thought it was just a simple Mother's Day greeting, but what you gave me was far greater. You gave me back my heart. Every word you wrote, every tear you shed onto that page. It healed something I didn't know could be healed. For years I carried the guilt of not being enough for you. I thought love meant food on the table and a roof overhead. But I see now that love also means showing up. Even when you're tired, even when you're broken. I wish I had told you that I loved you more often. I wish I had hugged you longer. But even when I couldn't say it, you were the reason I woke up every day." Margaret paused. Her vision blurred with tears again, but this time they didn't hurt. They flowed like warm rain. She took a deep breath and continued. "You said you understand me now. But my dear, you always did. Even when you were angry. Your heart has always been good, even when it was wounded. I'm proud of the woman you've become. Independent, brave, and full of grace. If you are flying away to another land, don't think of it as leaving me behind. Think of it as carrying me with you. In your laughter, in your kindness, in every choice you make." The words came slowly but naturally, like a conversation long overdue. Margaret smiled as she remembered Emily as a child, how she used to dance in the kitchen, spinning in circles with her tiny socks slipping on the tiles. "Dance like that again," she murmured as she wrote. "Dance and live and be free." She turned to the final part of the letter, her hand trembling slightly as she signed it with love. "Emily, you once said you'll never forget me, but the truth is I could never forget you. You were my first heartbeat outside of my own body. Every choice I made, even the wrong ones, were guided by my love for you. So wherever you go, remember this. Home isn't the house on Maple Street, it's the space between our hearts. And when you miss me, don't cry. Just close your eyes, hold the pendant, and I'll be right there with you." Margaret signed it simply, "With all my love, Mom." Then she folded the letter neatly, placed it inside a white envelope, and sealed it with care. Her handwriting was shaky, but the words were perfect. She looked out the window, watching the sunlight fade into evening gold. The same road stretched ahead, the one Emily had driven down. But this time, Margaret didn't feel the sting of goodbye. She whispered, "Now it's my turn to send something back." She walked to the small wooden box, opened it once more, and placed the envelope inside, among the photo, the drawing, and the tiny handprint card from years ago. Then she tied the blue ribbon back around it. It looked beautiful, a box full of love, pain and forgiveness all woven together. That night, as darkness fell, Margaret lit a candle and sat by the window again. She held the box close to her chest, her eyes reflecting the soft flame. And somewhere in the quiet between the ticking clock and the whispering wind, she spoke softly. "Thank you, Emily. You gave me the real gift. Not the card, not the letter, but peace." The candle flickered gently, and Margaret smiled. She felt as if the air around her carried warmth, not from the flame, but from something unseen. And for a brief, beautiful moment, she could almost feel Emily's presence, a whisper, a memory, a heartbeat echoing her own. Weeks later, a letter arrived in France. It was sealed with care, addressed in shaky handwriting that Emily recognized instantly. Inside was Margaret's letter, the reply she had written that day. Emily read it slowly, tears rolling down her cheeks as she sat by the window overlooking the Paris skyline. When she reached the final line, "Home isn't the house on Maple Street. It's the space between our hearts. Nee." She pressed the letter to her heart and smiled through her tears. That night, she placed her mother's pendant around her neck, looked up at the stars and whispered, "I know, Mom, I feel you." The wind rustled softly through the trees outside, as if carrying her mother's answer across oceans. "I'm here, my darling, always." Final message of the story. The real gift wasn't the card or the box or even the words. It was understanding. A daughter finally saw her mother's sacrifices, and a mother finally found peace in her daughter's love. And that, more than anything, is what Mother's Day is truly about.